Greetings from Savvy Layman. I was given an interesting task to build a budget PC for my brother. He's not a hardcore gamer, but appetite comes with eating, so I wanted to make his computer gaming ready. The obvious ongoing problem with DIY builds today is that everything is still expensive, especially the graphics cards. Though we can see some light at the end of the tunnel, discrete graphics cards still sell far over their MSRP, and obtaining a used graphics card can be tricky, as I explained in one of my previous videos. That made me think, could I perhaps save some money for a new GPU by purchasing other used components? Which components are safe to get secondhand? What graphics card should I choose as a stopgap solution? Finally, I decided to go with AMD's APU, Ryzen 5 5600G, which contains Vega 7 integrated GPU. APUs are not extremely popular in desktop space. Alright, Intel does use an integrated GPU in the majority of their desktop CPUs, except for the F SKUs, but their iGPU kind of sucks when it comes to gaming. Even the latest UHD graphics 770 inside Intel i9 12900K isn't powerful enough. On the other hand, AMD's Vega GPU can run games just fine, though its architecture is a bit obsolete by today's standards. And yes, it can even handle AAA titles, but I really need to manage your expectations here. Since die space is limited, AMD had to cut some corners. Ryzen 5 5600G is a very similar chip to Ryzen 5 5600X, but its L3 cache was cut by half to just 16 megabytes, and the APU only supports PCI Express version 3.0. The boost clock was also reduced by 200 MHz, but all these trade-offs are acceptable for a budget-oriented system in my opinion. There are a few components in every PC that rarely go bad over time, and these are motherboard, CPU, and RAM. Of course, electrostatic discharge can kill anything, but if these components are handled properly, they do not degrade when used. They have no moving parts inside either, so the probability of something dying is pretty low. Okay, I need to admit the first APU that I bought was dead on arrival, but the seller was cooperative and refunded my purchase. In any case, I highly recommend to have all used components tested on site to avoid potential scam. The second APU I tried worked, and it cost me 170 euros. The cooler was for free because I had a few stock Wraith Stealth coolers lying around. By the way, did you know C revision of the cooler was quieter than J revision? Now you do. I found Gigabyte Aorus Elite V2 motherboard with B550 chipset for only 70 euros. It's not a high-end board by any means, but it will work well in a budget build like this. It can easily run an 8-core CPU should my brother decide to upgrade one day. The board I picked was missing an M.2 heatsink, but I didn't need one for the NVMe drive I was going to use, and a cheap aftermarket M.2 heatsink cost just a few cents anyway. On the other hand, fast RAM is extremely important when building a system with an APU. This is because, unlike discrete graphics cards, APUs have no integrated video RAM. You will see how much impact a fast RAM kit makes in benchmarks. I found a stellar kit based on Samsung's BDI memory chips, namely G.Skill Ripjaws DDR4 3200 with somewhat aggressive XMP timings 14, 14, 14, 34. Since BDI kits are great for overclocking, I easily achieved 3600 megabits per second with timings 16, 16, 16, 32, 48 to 60, 1T. I provided a seldom used Kingston A2000 1TB NVMe SSD, and my other brother gave his power supply Gigabyte P850GM for half of the original price. Yeah, that's the exploding PSU, but you know what? 850 watts is such an overkill for this build that PSU doesn't even spin the fan. As it's never going to power any high-end graphics card anyway, this PSU is completely safe to use in this build. At the time of making this video, I'm still waiting for a brand new case to arrive. Now, let's fire up this compact computer to see what beast of a machine slumbers therein. And as usual, we'll have a look at a few synthetic benchmarks first. Cinebench R23 or CPU-Z do not care too much about the RAM speed, so I didn't even bother testing multiple settings. Leanpack and Y-Cruncher are a different story altogether. Leanpack saw a 4% improvement with XMP and another 9% with manual tuning. When enabling XMP, Y-Cruncher compute time decreased by 2% in single-core workload and by 5% in multi-core. Manual tuning sped up single-core tests by another 2% and multi-core tests by another 25%. I even had to rerun the test to verify this figure, but it was real. In the rest of the benchmarks, I will also include a moderate 200 MHz GPU overclock. 3DMark's Nitrate total score increased by 21% when enabling XMP, further 11% when manually tuned, and still another 4% when overclocking the iGPU. Firestrike total score jumped up by 18% with XMP, another 16% with the manual RAM overclock, and still another 5% when overclocking the Vega GPU. TimeSpy saw an 18% total score increase when enabling XMP, another 13% when manually overclocking the RAM, and another 6% when overclocking even the iGPU. AAA titles can only be run with the lowest quality preset and 1080p. If, however, upscaling features such as AMD Fidelity FX Super Resolution is available, it definitely helps. Battlefield 5 ran poorly in 1080p, but it got somewhat playable in 720p when manually overclocking. The same thing could be observed in Control. 720p with overclock or don't bother. Cyberpunk in 1080p could be played reasonably well when enabling AMD's FSR. A combination of 720p resolution, memory and GPU overclock as well as FSR turned this game into a very playable experience indeed. Watch Dogs Legion and Shadow of the Tomb Raider ran so poorly with stock settings that I even forgot to write them down. Both games were not really playable in 1080p, but in 720p with overclocking, they did well. In-game benchmark of Horizon Zero Dawn ran flawlessly, but there were intriguing image artifacts when playing. Strange. Other than that, 1080p was playable, only with overclock and FSR enabled, but 720p did okay even without upscaling. I need to say I'm very happy with how this budget build turned out. It's indeed a great computer for the price, and it's well upgradable too. I can highly recommend Ryzen 5 5600G APU for budget build such as this. If you're asking, the whole thing cost €600 including Microsoft Windows as well as Office licenses. And I can't wait to see how the upcoming Ryzen 6000 APU will perform, but I guess that's a story for another day. Thank you very much for watching and have a nice one.